Today I'm going to be talking about letting your body tell the story, using feminist research and friendship to reimagine education in our lives. And I'm really going to be focused on the letting your body part and the feminist research and friendship. So just so you have a sense of what I'm going to do today, first of all, I'm going to give us a moment to do a little embodied work ourselves. I'm going to give you a chance to get into your bodies. It's not lost on me that I'm giving a keynote. I'm very far from the audience. You're staring up at me. Maybe you're listening, but maybe you're distracted. So we're going to do a short activity. And then I'm going to talk about the work that Emily and I have developed around feminist friendship as an epistemology and doing co-autoethnography. And I think that this work, both the embodied part of the work as well as the research methodology piece, is creative, innovative, and it's a method of bringing theory to practice. And then at the end, I'll talk about sort of our understandings about embodied knowing, learning, and teaching as research in teacher education. Oops. Okay. So I've actually been in Sri Lanka now for 5 days. I've been down in Tongal, and it's been an absolutely amazing experience. And yesterday I had the privilege of working with a meditation teacher for 1 hour. I've been meditating for about 6 years now, but it was really special to be able to be here and do some work with him. And the first question that he asked me in his Dharma talk was, how much percentage of you is human and what percentage of you is machine? And of course, I said, well, what are you talking about? I'm 100% human. But as we began to talk more and more about the body and the practice of meditation, he reminded me of how mechanized, how much of a machine we really are, and how much that is increasing in this time of the digital world. And it really resonated for me about this research work that I've done with Emily, because we are really trying to tap into our bodies, the bodies that we carry with us all the time, but we don't always think about when we're teaching, when we're doing research. And so I think it's sort of funny that I'm going to ask you to now do a body scan meditation in a country or a part of the world where this might be quite a common practice for you in your daily life, but maybe it's not as common for you in academia or in your teaching. So before I get into the research, what I'd like you to do is take a moment to check in with your body. Make sure that your feet are on the ground and that you're sitting in a comfortable way, and that you feel, when you feel your feet, that you feel some sort of rooting or grounding. If you're comfortable, I'd like you to close your eyes, or you can simply lower them. And I'd like you to now take a deep breath in, and then exhale. And now I want you to do a body scan. I want you to start with your head. How does your head feel? Do you have a headache? Is your head heavy? Does it feel light? Now I want you to move to your jaw. This is often a place where you can carry a lot of stress. Is your jaw relaxed? Maybe you need to unclench it. And now your throat. How does your throat feel? Is it open, constricted? And now your shoulders. Are they raised up? Many of us walk around with our shoulders up to our necks or our head. And can you lower your shoulders? Can you breathe into your shoulders? And what about your stomach? I'm feeling some butterflies, but that might be because I'm up here on the mic. How does your stomach feel? And now your arms. Are your muscles tense? Are they loosening? And your legs, are they tired? Are they numb? And finally, your feet. Are they providing you with some feelings of being grounded? Can you wiggle your toes? And now I'm just going to invite you to take one more deep breath in and then let it out. So that's a very quick and not particularly deep way for you to get into your body, but it would be so strange for me to be talking about bringing the body into your work and not actually invite you to do so. And of course, this kind of body scan is something I've done with little children, with middle school, high school, college age, or even my doctoral students. Oops, backwards, okay. So, as I said, I'm gonna be talking with you about two main parts of the research from our book. The feminist friendship methodology and epistemology that Emily and I have created that we think is really innovative and creative. Emily, even though she's not present with me here today, she's present with me in spirit, and you're gonna see lots of pictures of her. So Emily and I have been working together for almost 19 years. It will be 19 years in September. We've been co-teaching as teacher educators. We've designed curriculum together. We've designed innovative programs. We have applied for grants together. We do research together, we write together, and most importantly, we are really good friends. And that friendship has developed over the past almost 19 years. And in the work that we do, we rely on that friendship. That friendship brings out the best of us, and it allows us to be a multiplicity of ourselves. We're not just professors when we're together. When we're together, we're women, we're friends, we're professors, we're mothers, we're daughters, we're all of the different roles that we bring into our life. We bring our whole selves in. And our relationship is a blending of the personal and the professional, much like what we would say is a blending of the theory and the practice. We build from one another's strengths. Because we're a team and we collaborate, we feel comfortable taking risks. We care for one another. We value each other as whole people, and we fight injustice together in solidarity. When we started doing this work for our book, Our Bodies Tell the Story, we wanted to know what research is out there about friendship. If we were having this feminist friendship epistemology, we wanted to get a sense of, well, what does the research tell us about that? And we found Denworth's work on friendship, and she says the best friendships invite vulnerability. And this really resonated for us because we wanted to be able to be vulnerable in our research. We were exploring what it meant to be a woman growing up in the United States. So we wanted to go back to our histories as children, as adolescents, as young teachers, and now as women. And we wanted to be able to be honest and authentic, and so we needed that vulnerability. And Denworth, in this first quote, even talks about how you literally lower your stress response when you are with a friend. that the presence of a friend literally changes how you feel in your body. And I think that that's really interesting. So there's a connection between embodied knowing and learning and feminist friendship. And so as we've gotten to be close friends, a lot of the friendship developed also through our co-teaching, which is I think when you teach with another person, it's also a very vulnerable act, because in some ways you're your most self when you're teaching. And so co-teaching and co-writing together has allowed us to mirror that vulnerability. And it's also a process that relies on intuition and the unsaid. Sometimes when you're teaching with somebody or when you're writing with somebody, you do something instinctively. You don't necessarily plan for it. So in our work, we co-construct ideas, we write into each other's narratives, we're thought partners and critical friends who value what the other has to offer. Tillman Healy talks about a methodology of friendship, and we think that this really resonates with the ways that we think about how we make meaning together. The idea that a friendship allows for openness, welcomes multiple voices, values lived experience, which is a part of that embodied piece, and emotions. It's not just the intellect. So we, in this book, used a methodology that I actually created back in 2002 called co-autoethnography. And we used because we're friends and we're always in constant communication, even in my car ride this morning from Tangal to here, I was texting with Emily, catching up with her, telling her about the trip. We use our everyday writing of our friendship as our data source. So it could be texts, emails, Facebook messages, phone calls, in-person conversations, but instead of feeling like we had to collect special data for our research, we use the data that comes from our day-to-day lives. So we find that that's very innovative. And then the process of co-autoethnography is really trying to narrow the space between the writers and encouraging the retelling of stories. So in this book, we were retelling our stories about childhood, going to school, growing up as girls, adolescence. We encounter our autobiographies not as fixed entities, but as texts that encourage us to re-examine, relive, refeel, dialogue, and inquire. So in our conversations, it's where we act as critical friends and where we push each other to say, is that really the way to interpret that story of your experience? Are there other insights? Are there other things to think about? Are there artifacts? For the book, we looked at a lot of artifacts from our histories, our photographs, records of schools, even like letters from peers, as a way to understand what our journey had been. So co-autoethnography involves listening, over telling. The meaning comes from the writing into each other's stories. So it's in the dialogic writing. And then we go to the research and the literature to see where the connections are. So for the book, because we did such a large span of life, we had to look at a lot of different literatures and research to sort of bring in that piece to our writing. And also because we're white, middle class, heterosexual women, we wanted to make sure to also bring in the voices of people that were different from us. And so we come to know in relationship with one another through our bodies and our minds, allowing for embodied knowing, vulnerability, and reciprocity. So Moving now more to trying to pay attention with time. Yes, okay, I'm good. Moving now more to the idea of embodied knowing. Why do we care about the body? Why do we think that the body is important? And really, there's a lot of connection between embodied knowing and being feminist researchers and teachers. So I thought this quote is a great way for us to think about sort of the absence of the body. I'm going to read it to you, but you can also read it along with me. "Why do you keep doing this to me?" Body asked me one day. "I don't know. If I knew that, maybe I could finally stop and treat you right, with care and respect." "I deserve nothing less from you," Body said. "I know, it's just that I forget." "You forget what?" my body asked of me. "I forget that you matter, that I matter, that I am matter." "Yes, you do, and yes, you are," she replied. So in chapter 2 of our book, where we really talk about our epistemology and our methodologies, we have a section about embodiment. And I thought it would be useful for you to hear some of the dialogue that we had as we were thinking about why the body was so important. So in front of you, you have a few slides that give you a feeling for the kind of data that I'm talking about. So I wrote, "I've been thinking a lot about how we've discovered our bodies in our work." I giggled as I wrote that sentence because it sounds as if we haven't paid attention to our bodies before this work. And yet, of course, our bodies are constantly informing our decisions in our lives. And Emily wrote, "I mean, it doesn't surprise me at all in a lot of ways. We both spent a lot of our lives thinking about mind-body connections because of dance and everything. Both Emily and I were dancers as young girls and adolescents. I do think I never took it seriously as something connected to my work until we started doing Theater of the Oppressed. But it's funny, because I was so lost after I quit dance. But when I started student teaching, I remember saying to someone, 'Oh, I found another thing that engages me in mind, emotions, and body.' And so even by the time I was 21, I intuitively knew that teaching was an embodied act." And I wrote, "I actually think it was you, Em, who noted that after my mom got sick with an autoimmune disease, I began to pay more attention to my body, discovering new ways to listen to what it was telling me. I think unconsciously I was so terrified by my mother's experience of ignoring her body and the growing symptoms of her illness. Once she was diagnosed, she already had stage 5 kidney failure, as well as other failing organs like her lungs and her heart. Although I'm not certain what could have happened, I wonder if she might have been able to prevent some of the deterioration if she had just listened to her body rather than ignoring it. She had just spent an entire lifetime repressing the feelings of abuse, divorce, anxiety, and so this ignoring of her body was just a continuation of that." And Emily said, "I remember this. I get it. You know, because of my fibromyalgia, I often have to discern what I should just be pushing through and what to listen to. I have felt like if I listen to my body all the time, I'll never get out of bed, and so listening becomes unhelpful sometimes. I wonder how much that was true from your mom, you know, that the only way she survived was by pushing through." And I wrote, "I'm trying to find the words to say this, but I think I've always had a sense of my own embodied knowing, but I haven't always legitimized it with others because being smart intellectually and relying on my mind has worked in my favor for so many years. It's what has enabled me to be successful and has set me apart from others. I have played in a man's world because of my intellect, and it's hard to let that go. And I understand that it's not one or the other, but mind and body combined. But allowing my embodied knowing to come out can feel risky. That's why I so appreciate our friendship, Em, because I can be my whole self and you don't look at me as crazy or even too emotional. And Emily says, yes, I feel that too. I'm still amazed at how much shame I experience when I have an emotional reaction as a woman, and how quickly I revert to binary thinking. So that gives you a little insight into some of the data that we were generating to get our heads around why we kept coming back to the body. And the thing is, there are a lot of obstacles to embodiment in academia, and even in the K-12 or in the elementary, middle, and high school classroom settings. In universities, we're stuck within the Cartesian divide between mind and body. We privilege the mind and language at all costs. I mean, all you have to do is take a minute and look around the room, right? You're not actually having a particularly embodied experience. I'm up here talking to you, hopefully to you and not at you, and you're listening to me maybe, but maybe you're also thinking about other things. We ignore the body, emotions, and the lived experience. And when you think about this through an intersectional lens, and this is something that I don't know if it is necessarily a viewpoint that people are taking up in this part of the world, but in the United States, we're thinking a lot about intersectionality. You know, there's a connection between favoring the mind and white supremacy, misogyny, and heteronormativity. And something that we're talking a lot about in the States is the neoliberal agenda for education, where we find ourselves not only removing the body from the classroom in favor of lectures and standardized testing and evaluation, but we're also constantly regulating the body of children, of young children. We're forcing them to sit still for hours and hours. They have to walk through school silently, maybe in straight lines. And generally, we're not teaching them or giving them the tools to tap into their body, to use that knowledge, that intuitive knowledge, to help them navigate the world. And the truth is that arguing for embodiment, embodied knowing, it's not new. John Dewey, who I think of as one of my greatest influences, founder of constructivism and progressive ed, in 1934, he talked about the problem of separating the scientists and philosophers from the poets and the painters. And he said that he talked about something called emotionalized thinking. That's really what I'm talking about when I say embodied thinking, and the value of feeling your way into meaning. And Louise Rosenblatt, my background is in literacy, language and literacy. Louise Rosenblatt, who was a literacy scholar, she also emphasized the need for both an efferent stance where you're looking for information, but also an aesthetic stance where you're reading in order to make meaning and you're allowing your feelings to respond. And she talked about how we need both of those things to make meaning in the world. And of course, in teacher education, using a constructivist lens, we've privileged the lived experience. A lot of that comes from Dewey, actually. And we create such practices as field experience, student teaching, or even some work that Emily and I did back in 2010 to 2014. We created a teacher residency program where students apprenticed as teachers, just like medical students apprentice as doctors. So rather than give you answers, which is not my way as a feminist teacher, I feel it's better for me to pose some questions. And I invite you to think about these questions in the context of where you're working, whether you're a practitioner, a researcher, a scholar, a professor, a policymaker. But I want you to think about some of these questions came out of the work that we did in the book. What happens when the mind and body are brought into our work as teachers, as teacher educators, as educational leaders, as researchers, as policymakers? How does embodied learning encourage deep self-understanding and critical self-reflection so that pre-service teachers or in-service teachers or faculty, for that matter, can radically imagine another way, as Maxine Green, one of my mentors, would say? Where do we give people space to radically imagine? And how does the body help us to demechanize so that we have room to be creative and to think in different ways about what schools and teaching could look like? How does embodied learning allow for feelings of discomfort, cognitive dissonance, and uncertainty? All things that we need to feel to push ourselves to be open, to change our schemata, to learn new ideas, to take on new worldviews. And that uncertainty piece is very important to me as a feminist teacher. We don't always know the answers, and sometimes the best learning is when we don't. How does embodied teaching invite emotions in the classroom, and what are the benefits of these emotions? How do we help students shift to embrace those emotions rather than repress them? And how much of themselves should they bring into the classroom? Can they bring into the classroom? And that actually really resonates again with the meditation teacher that I met with yesterday, who talked to me about how we're so conditioned in society to repress those feelings all the time rather than use them as a way to understand the world. And the last questions are very relevant to a lot of work that's happening in the States now around trauma, and what do we do as teachers when our students experience trauma, and how do we help support them through that? And there's not that much research on it. It's actually growing. So how can embodied learning help with past experiences of trauma and or secondary trauma syndrome? Secondary trauma syndrome is when teachers experience secondary trauma syndrome when they're working with children who've experienced trauma. And what happens when teachers themselves bring their own trauma into the classroom? What are ways that embodied learning can help to support that work? That has become, especially in this post-COVID climate, has become something that we're very concerned about in schools in the United States. So those are some questions that I pose to you for you to think about for yourselves.